In a world where heroes reign supreme, a powerless boy finds himself cast aside by his team, deemed useless and unworthy of their ranks. With nowhere to turn, no money to his name, and not a single combat skill to rely on, he is left to navigate a harsh reality where survival itself feels like an impossible battle. We see that somewhere high in the mountains, a small village was living in fear, getting torn apart again and again by a monstrous Fenrir, ranked S-class. Eventually, with nothing left to lose, the villagers poured all their savings into hiring a legendary SS-rank adventurer team to end the nightmare. The members of Flaming Dragon Fang are among the most feared adventurers alive, each with their own brutal specialty. But then there's Kurt, and the only damn thing he's ever been useful for is chores, so he hides behind a wall, just trying to stay out of harm's way. But the first unlucky one the Fenrir charges at when it appears is Kurt, so he gets blasted through the air like trash, and the rest of the team steps in to handle the real fight. Golnova then shouts at Bandana to pin the creature down, so she flicks out her wire and wraps it around the beast. But within seconds, the Fenrir smashes her into a wall so hard it sounds like something broke. Normally, that'd be the end of her story, but with Marlefist nearby, she's back on her feet in no time and jumps back into the mess without even blinking. This time, she anchors herself to a tree to keep from being thrown again, giving Golnova the chance he needs to strike at the Fenrir's skull. So he launches into the air and engulfs the monster's head in flames with his sword. The villagers are beyond grateful for the Fenrir's defeat, so they scrape together what little they got left to throw a feast for the party, even though they're barely surviving. But even with that, Golnova the jerk can't stand this boring peasant food. He tells Kurt to make something halfway decent instead, and Bandana asks him to make it special, since today's the last time they'll be tasting anything he cooks. Kurt has no clue what the hell they're talking about, so he turns to Golnova for answers, and the jerk tells him flat out that he's being kicked from the team starting today. Kurt protested, asking if he'd done something wrong, but Golnova tells him the truth. Kurt's just not enough. Sure, he handles chores, makes food, and cleans up, but when it comes to battle, he's dead weight. And also, they're only allowed 4 members in the squad, so if they want to make room for someone who can actually fight, preferably a powerful mage or at least a competent warrior, he's gotta go. Kurt begs them to let him stay. His voice cracks, and he's clearly trying not to cry. But Golnova's had it, so he kicks Kurt in the stomach to shut him the hell up. He's tired of hearing him weeping, and they don't need him anymore because they've made their choice, so that's the brutal end of it. The day after getting kicked out, Kurt walks away from the village with nothing but the clothes on his back, no idea where he's going, and a wallet emptier than his future. He just keeps moving, dragging his feet, until he ends up in the city of Samela. He's got a few coins left, so if he doesn't find work soon, he's completely screwed. Eventually, he spots a temp agency that doesn't look too shady and decides to give it a shot. As he walks in, a receptionist named Kershel gives him a quick look and asks whether he's here to hire someone or to find work. Kurt tells her he's looking for a job, and she nods, tells him they'll need to do an interview and a standard aptitude test to get started. She starts with the usual questions, his name, age, and where the hell he's from. Kurt replies, "My name is Kurt Rockens, I'm 15 years old, and I come from a small village nestled in the Sheen Mountains called Hast." Kershel is taken aback as she had never heard of such a remote village, but she quickly moves on to his work experience. Kurt explains that he was once a member of Flaming Dragon Fang, though his duties were limited to basic chores, and that he was recently fired. Kershel's eyes widen at the mention of his affiliation with an SS-rank party. Even if he only handled menial tasks, having that prestigious name on his resume might just open some doors. Relieved by this unexpected silver lining, Kurt is eager to complete the aptitude tests so that Kershel can assess his strengths and weaknesses. In this world, aptitudes are considered gifts bestowed by the divine, and if luck is on his side, he might discover a hidden talent today. Aptitudes range from a humble G rank to a dazzling triple S rank, with differences so vast that a G rank sword user can barely lift the damn blade without falling over, while an A rank warrior could cleave a rock in 2 without breaking a sweat. Kurt's heart races with excitement as he awaits his test results, but his hopes are dashed when every single combat-related aptitude is graded a G rank. The realization sinks in, he has no chance of ever excelling in a combat role. Devastated, Kurt feels his spirit crumble, but Kershel reassures him that there might still be a bright side. She explains that he could still possess a valuable trade skill, such as alchemy or blacksmithing. Unfortunately, the technician responsible for those particular aptitude tests is currently on vacation, meaning Kurt will have to wait another damn week to find out if he's good at anything at all. Kurt tells her straight up that he can't wait a whole damn week because he's literally one loaf of bread away from starving in the street, and if he doesn't find work today, he's done for. Kershel gets it, so she nods and points toward a stack of sandbags nearby, asking him to try lifting one. He walks over and grabs one of the bags, and the second his hands touch it, something weird happens. There's this strange pull if the sand inside sucked out a bit of his mana. Still, he lifts it without much effort, and that's good enough for Kershaw. If he can manage that, then she figures he's got what it takes to do some basic construction work. She tells him about a frontier town out in the Margraviate of Tacom that's currently hiring people to help rebuild the city walls, and she will write him a letter of recommendation, so he should be able to get a foot in the door. Kurt thanks her genuinely and heads out immediately to meet with the Margrave. When Kurt shows up, the Margrave gives him a once-over after reading the letter. The guy clearly doesn't think much of him. In his head, Kurt probably looks more like someone who'd break under pressure than build a wall. But the man's desperate because he needs all the help he can get, so he shrugs and decides to give the kid a shot. He then instructs Kurt to mix cement and use it to mend the wall, promising that his pay will reflect the volume of work completed. The Margrave says he'll come back later to check on things, and before leaving, he adds one last warning. If Kurt hasn't used at least half a barrel of cement by the time he returns, the pay's gonna be garbage. Kurt wants to ask something because no one said anything about needing to pour mana into the cement to make it stick, but he keeps his mouth shut. Maybe it's common knowledge and he just sounds stupid. Besides, he finds it weird that the quota is only half a barrel. That feels way too easy, so he makes up his mind. He's going to use as much damn cement as possible before the guy gets back. By the time the Margrave returns, he looks like he's seen a ghost. Not only has Kurt hit the quota, he's gone way beyond it, he's already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt even apologizes, saying he could have done more, but he ran out of cement midway. The Margrave just stares at him, struggling to believe what he's seeing, so he squints at the top of the wall and asks how the hell Kurt managed to fix that part too. And with a happy face, Kurt says that he just chucked the cement up there and used a stick to spread it around. Normally, someone like the Margrave would have called Kurt a damn liar because finishing that much work in that short time sounds flat out impossible. But the wall speaks for itself, and clearly, Kurt made it work, so the man swallows his doubt and admits the truth for what it is. He asks Kurt how long he's planning to stick around, and Kurt replies that he only needs the job for a week. That surprisingly puts the Margrave in good mood, but then he tells Kurt that he's already done more than enough for the day and can head out for now. There's just one problem: he doesn't have enough money on him to pay Kurt properly. So instead he hands over a small pouch of coins and says he'll send the rest through the agency later. Kurt's eyes go wide because even that small pouch holds more than he ever earned back when he was busting his ass for the so-called hero party. Over the next few days, Kurt keeps showing up, working hard, fixing section after section of the wall. But suddenly, the Margrave informs him that his services are no longer needed. When Kurt asks why, the Margrave explains that the wall repair project was intended to provide employment for those in poverty. But Kurt's just too damn efficient means that if he keeps working, there won't be any jobs left for anyone else. The man's not mad. Hell, he even praises Kurt, saying his skill level looks like it's at least double S rank, maybe even triple. Honestly, he says that a guy like Kurt would be better off working in the royal capital, not patching walls out here. And with that, he gives Kurt a generous payout as compensation for ending the job so suddenly, then walks away without another word. But Kurt, being Kurt, completely misreads the situation. He thinks the Margrave fired him because he sucked, and that thought hits him harder than it should. Feeling defeated all over again, Kurt heads back to the temp agency and finds his mommy to tell her he got fired. Unfortunately, it's still going to be a few more days before they can evaluate his trade aptitudes. Just as they're talking, a commotion breaks out at the front desk. It looks like a girl is arguing with the receptionist, trying to set up a recruitment ad. The receptionist, clearly irritated, and tells her that no one in their right mind would agree to the kind of awful working conditions she's offering. But the girl doesn't back down and says that the receptionist should at least try to find someone, and her persistence starts creating a disturbance. Concerned, Kershaw goes over to see what the hell is going on. Her coworker quickly explains that this girl wants to hire a miner to dig through a mountain that's never been explored before, but she refuses to offer any upfront payment, and she only wants to pay if the excavation succeeds. Kershaw doesn't even try to hide her disbelief because no sane person would take a deal like that, and suggests that the girl should instead seek investors to develop the mine. The girl, however, retorts that she simply cannot do that because if she doesn't pay off the taxes by the end of the week, they're going to seize the mine. Just then, Kurt steps up and says he's crazy enough to take on a job like that. But Kurt says that back in his village, he helped out with mine excavation plenty of times, so he's no stranger to this work. Kershaw asks him if he's truly sure about accepting, pointing out that with the contract the girl's offering, there's a good chance he won't get paid at all. But before Kurt can even speak, the girl cuts in. She says she was hoping to hire a brawny dwarf, not a skinny boy who looks like he'd pass out lifting a shovel, so she feels kind of bad making him do it. Then again, hiring a dwarf would cost her at least 10 silver upfront, and she doesn't have that much, so she reluctantly decides to take Kurt after all. As the two of them head out, Kershell watches from her desk, a little worried. The job sounds like a mess, and she's not sure Kurt knows what he's getting into. Honestly, part of her thinks he'd probably make more working in a love hotel, and she even daydreams about spending a night with him and even says that she'd pay good money for one night with him. While she's still caught in that hot thought, her coworker snaps her out of it because a transfer just came in, and it's the payment for the work Kurt did on the wall for the Margrave. She was expecting maybe 50 silver, but instead it's 200 gold. She stares at the check for a second, like it's some kind of mistake, and she's so stunned that she nearly trips over the pile of sandbags next to her chair. Her coworker quickly warns her to watch her step, explaining that these aren't ordinary sandbags. They're used to measure a person's mana, and they get heavier when touched by someone with a large mana reserve. Typically, they don't react with normal folks, so Kilchill can pick them up easily. But she recalls seeing Kurt struggle with them a few days ago, and she starts to wonder if he's really just some lost kid looking for work. At the same time, Kurt and Eurytia head into the forest towards her campsite. When they arrive, Kurt grows a bit uneasy upon noticing there's only one tent. Eurytia assures him that the tent is spacious enough for the two of them to share a night's sleep, but Kurt protests, saying he'd never be able to fall asleep if he's lying next to a gorgeous girl like her. After hearing Kurt call her gorgeous, Eurytia is momentarily upset, thinking that he's just messing with her, but when she looks at him, she can tell he means it. She goes quiet for a moment, then hands him a boiled potato for dinner. It's nothing fancy, just a simple boiled potato, but having someone cook for Kurt after so long means the world to him. He's also thankful that Eurytia is sitting with him to share the meal, since Golnova and the others from the hero party always refuse to let Kurt eat in the same damn room with them. Later that night, Kurt and Eurytia retire to bed, but Kurt finds himself unable to sleep because Eurytia is dressed only in her underwear. He knows damn well he's not going to fall asleep with that going on, so he grabs his stuff and decides to sleep outside. And once he slips away, Eurytia, who had been feigning slumber, slowly opens her eyes. She had deliberately gone to bed in just her underwear to test whether Kurt would be a predator in his sleep, and now she's relieved to confirm he's a decent person. The next day, Eurytia steps out of the tent and finds Kurt sleeping by a tree. She feels a little bad for making him sleep out here, but then she notices that her jacket has been repaired. Kurt wakes up not long after, and Eurytia asks him with genuine curiosity if he was the one who fixed it, and he nods. She's surprised by how clean the stitching is, and she didn't expect him to know how to sew. Now she's wondering if he's really cut out for mining, but it's too late to back out, so they need to get to work. Kurt then asks if she's picked a place to start digging, but she says she was just going to pick a random spot and hope for the best. Kurt tells her that method's useless and says he knows a better way. He takes her to a rocky part of the mountain and starts looking around. Within minutes, he finds a chunk of stone filled with gemstones. Eurytia is shocked because she didn't expect results that fast, but Kurt keeps going, and in less than 10 minutes, he's found every gem in the area. She stares at the stones in disbelief because if she sold all of them, she could pay off her debt easily. But Kurt tells her she can't sell them. At first, she thinks it's because he found them, so they belong to him, but that's not it. He tells her the gems will be worth more if he turns them into magic crystals. She says that's a nice idea, but there are only 10 mages in the whole kingdom who can do that, but before she finishes talking, Kurt already has a finished crystal in his hand. Stunned into silence, Eurytia can barely process that not only did Kurt produce a magic crystal, but he did so in the blink of an eye, something even the most seasoned mages would struggle with for at least an hour. After Kurt finishes transforming all the raw gems into gleaming crystals, he finally agrees to let Eurytia take them to market. She then heads off to the city while he stays behind on the mountain, since he still has a few things he wants to take care of. And at the city's customs agency, she confidently declares that she wishes to sell her magic crystals, but given their extraordinary value, the agent immediately questions their origin. She knows there's no way he'd believe her if she said some random guy made them, so she pulls out her royal family emblem to shut him up. It's kind of a bluff because she hasn't worked for the royal family in a while, and they just never bothered taking the emblem back. But it works, and the agent lets her use the teleportation circle to head to the capital. Once she arrives, she visits the shop of an old friend named Mimiko. She tells her she's got some magic crystals to sell, so Mimiko checks them out, and at first glance, they don't seem like anything special. But after a closer look, she notices they're packed with 10 times the usual amount of mana, and that put their value at 10 gold each. Eurytia is speechless because Kurt gave her 50 of them. But Mimiko doesn't make a big deal about it, and she just counts out 500 gold and hands it over like it's nothing. But before Eurytia can leave, Mimiko has two conditions. First, she wants Eurytia to promise that any crystals like this will only be sold at her shop, because crystals this powerful can't just be allowed to circulate freely. Second, she wants to know who made them. Eurytia agrees to the first part without hesitation, But as for the name of the person who created them, she says she'll need to ask for his permission first. Mimiko, who also happens to be a court mage for the royal family, doesn't take that lightly. She tries to use her status to pressure Euryssia into talking, but Euryssia doesn't work for the royal family anymore, so she doesn't have to follow any of Mimiko's orders. Seeing she won't get anywhere by force, Mimiko tries a softer approach. She tells Euryssia that if the mage who made those crystals agrees to work for the royal family, they'll give him the title of Count and full access to the royal research lab. And with that, Euryssia leaves Mimiko's shop with the gold in hand, and the following morning, she returns to the mountain. But when she gets there, she stops in her tracks because Kurt built a whole damn house in just one day. Anyway, they sit inside the house and Euryssia brings up that one of her connections is looking to hire Kurt as a royal mage. If he agrees, he'll basically be treated like nobility, with a solid paycheck, full benefits, the whole package. Kurt can't wrap his head around the idea that someone would actually offer him something that big, but Euryssia swears it's legit. She asks him what he plans to do, and to her total disbelief, Kurt says he's going to turn it down. Honestly, she's stunned because turning down a royal mage position is just plain nuts. But Kurt says he doesn't feel like he's earned the right to be put above anyone else. In fact, he still wants to crawl back to the Flaming Dragon party and beg to be their damn errand boy again. And speaking of the Flaming Dragon crew, they're out there getting absolutely wrecked by some pissed-off tree monster. Golnova's fire spells are completely useless for some reason, so he yells at Martelfist to heal him. She's been trying for a while now, but her healing's barely working, and no one knows why. In desperation, Golnova tells their new recruit to throw out a fire spell, but surprise, the guy doesn't even know how to use fire magic, which by the way is supposed to be Golnova's whole job. Without Kurt around to glue the team together, their entire rhythm is shot, and Bandana's the only one who seems to realize just how deep in crap they really are. Back on Kurt's side, he's still working with Euryssia in the gem mines, and he casually tells her that he located a really solid vein yesterday, enough to keep digging for a while. Euryssia appreciates the hustle, but she worries he's pushing himself too hard after everything he did the day before. Kurt, being Kurt, brushes it off and says it's fine, he got 6 hours of sleep. That completely floors Euryssia, and now she's trying to calculate how the hell he had time to build a damn house and still get that much rest. But Kurt totally misreads her silence and assumes she's mad about him being lazy, so he apologizes and says he'll make up for it. Euryssia knows she should probably sit him down and explain how crazy strong he really is, but honestly, she still doesn't know how the hell to even start that conversation. So instead, the two of them grab their gear and head out to the mine to dig up more gems. Kurt then leads Euryssia to the area he scoped out earlier. To her, it looks like a plain old patch of forest, but Kurt insists there's a decent haul buried underneath. He does give her one weird warning though. Don't dig deeper than 500 meters, like that's something you could do by accident with a handpick and some free time. Before she can question him further, Kurt turns to leave. When she asks where he's headed, he tells her he's got another dig site in mind and they'll meet up again later. So Euryssia gets to work and she spends the entire day digging like a lunatic, and by the time the sun starts setting, she finally hits pay dirt, a massive chunk of topaz. She's thrilled, and since she gave all the profits from the previous magic gems to Kurt because he found them, but this one's all hers. She could ask him to turn the gem into a magic stone and probably triple the value, but something in her stops her. She doesn't want to take advantage of him because he's already done enough. Still, curiosity gets the best of her and she heads out to check on Kurt. And while she expected him to overdo it, he always does, but what she finds goes way beyond that. The man didn't just dig, he straight up built an entire underground tunnel network in just 8 damn hours. Eventually, Kurt emerges from the tunnel, looking a little bummed. He tells her that the dig was kind of a bust because he only managed to grab a small amount of the material he was actually after, and says that everything else is just junk he's planning to toss. Euryssia takes a peek inside the cart, expecting rubble, but instead finds glittering metal that looks suspiciously not like garbage. She asks what it is, and Kurt casually replies that it is just mithril ore. Apparently in his hometown, that stuff was so common it got tossed aside like weeds. Euryssia just stares at him, unable to process the words coming out of his mouth. She's now dying to know where this guy even grew up if he thinks mithril is landfill material. Then she asks him what he was looking for, and Kurt pulls out a small glowing stone and tells her he was hoping to find orichalcum. He only dug up enough to fill a tiny box, but that's more than enough. This stuff is literally called the metal of the gods. 1 gram of it is worth a fortune, and Kurt just found a box of it like it's no big deal. At that point, Euryssia decides she's done with mining for the day and tells Kurt the topaz will cover her taxes, and just like that, their little contract is officially over. which means Kurt now has to go job hunting again, completely unaware that his bank account is stacked with more gold than most nobles see in a lifetime. While he's heading over to the agency, Kurt ends up bumping into Bandana. He's actually pretty happy to see her and asks what brings her out here. That's when she tells him she's not part of Flaming Dragon anymore, but there's a bit of a story behind that. Then we learn that after their last mission went completely sideways, Golnova stormed off to some fancy 5-star restaurant looking for a decent meal. Problem is, no matter how good the place was supposed to be, everything tasted like crap compared to Kurt's cooking. Golnova totally lost it, trashed the whole place, and walked out without paying. Later, he runs into Bandana in some back alley, and she calls him out for going way too far. But Golnova's too far gone to listen. He's obsessed. All he wants is food that lives up to what Kurt used to make, and he tells Bandana to track Kurt down and drag him back, even if she has to break every bone in his body. Yeah, dude's completely unhinged at this point. Rather than argue, Bandana just swipes his teleportation crystal and bolts. As she's getting away, she spots the city guards heading right for him. And now that he can't teleport out, he's definitely getting arrested for wrecking that restaurant. To make things worse, Marlefus also got summoned by the church for some unknown reason, so yeah, Flaming Dragon's done for. Bandana doesn't share every messy detail about Golnova losing his mind, but she gives Kurt enough to get the picture. Kurt's clearly upset to hear the party broke up. He was still holding on to the hope that he could go back to them someday, but now that dream's gone. Bandana, on the other hand, is confused about why he even wanted that in the first place, so Kurt explains that he really admired Golnova. He genuinely cared about him and somehow hasn't realized just how much of a bastard he really was, so losing the chance to work with him again makes him sad. Bandana doesn't get it at all, because to her, Golnova was just a cover, an excuse for her to stick close and keep an eye on Kurt. Anyway, since Kurt was already on his way to the guild office, Bandana figures he's job hunting. And lucky for him, she's got a lead. One of her friends runs a workshop and has been needing some extra help lately. And not just any workshop, this woman's an atelier master. That's a big deal because there are only a handful of them around, and they're basically as powerful and respected as a noble. She asks if Kurt's interested in taking the job, and of course he says he's down. So Bandana hands him a map, points him in the right direction, and sends him off toward his next adventure. After a bit, Kurt arrives at the place Bandana marked for him. It's supposed to be Atelier Master's workshop, but honestly, it just looks like a normal house. Nothing fancy or magical about it. He knocks on the front door, and to his surprise, it's answered by a tiny elf girl. For a second, Kurt's thrown off thinking this is the Atelier Master. But the girl quickly clears things up. She's not the master, just her assistant. Her name's Michelle, and she seems genuinely happy to see him. Kurt tells her he's here about the job, and Michelle lights up like it's the best news she's heard all week. She says she's been swamped lately and could really use an extra set of hands. She leads him straight into the kitchen, and the moment he walks in, a pungent smell hits him like a wall, something like a mix between moldy herbs and your grandma's foot. Michelle's immediately apologetic, saying the place is a disaster because her boss has had her running around non-stop, so she hasn't had a moment to tidy up. Before Kurt can even reply, a voice from somewhere else in the house yells out Michelle's name. She dashes off, leaving Kurt alone in the battlefield of a kitchen, and asks him to help clean up a bit. It's not exactly the magical apprenticeship Kurt had in mind, but cleaning isn't hard, so he rolls up his sleeves and gets to it. About half an hour later, the kitchen's spotless. Kurt's done his part, but Michelle still hasn't come back to give him any further instructions, so he starts wandering the house to figure out what to do next. He comes across a room in one of the hallways and gently knocks. A girl inside casually tells him to come in. When he opens the door, he's not ready for what he sees. A nearly naked girl standing beside her bed like it's the most normal thing in the world. Kurt immediately panics and apologizes, backing up as fast as possible, but she waves it off like it's no big deal. He quickly explains that he's just looking for Michelle, and the girl calmly says she's probably down in the basement. Kurt's about to take off again, but something stops him. He spots a strange mark on her stomach, a very dark, unnatural one. His brain immediately clicks. That's a curse. He asks if she'd let him examine it, and she agrees without hesitation. Kurt kneels beside her and gently places his hand over the mark, trying to sense the depth of the curse. Curses like this usually mess up internal organs, and he figures eating must be painful for her. But surprisingly, her stomach didn't seem too damaged because he heard the growl of her stomach. Hearing that, Kurt offers to head back to the now-clean kitchen and cook something for her. Elsewhere, Eurytia is sitting down with Mimiko to talk about the whole Mithril and Orichalcum situation Kurt dropped on them. What's alarming isn't just that he found them, it's that he didn't even process them into magic-grade crystals this time, and they're still valued at over 50,000 gold coins. That kind of value is starting to seriously stress Eurytia out, So she turns to Mimiko and asks what would happen if the world found out what Kurt is capable of, and Mimiko doesn't sugarcoat it. Best case, someone kidnaps him and uses him like a personal goldmine. Worst case, he ends up with a knife in his back because people see him as too dangerous to keep around. Mimiko then flips the question back on Eurytia and asks what exactly she is planning to do with Kurt, so Eurytia explains that she's been thinking about registering him as an atelier master. It'd give him enough recognition and legal protection to keep people from messing with him, and she plans to stick around as his bodyguard. But the only problem is Kurt himself, because he's completely blind to his own talent, and even worse, he keeps thinking of himself as nothing special. If she doesn't act fast, he's going to end up in a world of trouble, just because he doesn't know how rare he actually is. Meanwhile, back at the workshop, Kurt has just finished cooking a warm bowl of porridge for the mysterious girl he ran into earlier. At that moment, Michelle and the atelier master Ophelia come walking up from the basement. They both freeze the second they see the kitchen. Not only is it spotless, it smells amazing. Ophelia blinks at the scene, totally thrown off. She points at the stove and asks about the food, so Kurt casually tells her that the girls upstairs said she was hungry, so he whipped something up. Ophelia's expression shifts slightly when she realizes which girl he's talking about, and she immediately makes Kurt swear to keep quiet about her. Kurt agrees, not really seeing the big deal. After that, Ophelia thanks him for the help and hands him 3 silver coins and tells him he can head home for the day. Kurt stares at the money, completely shocked. He thinks it's way too generous for just cleaning up a mess and making a quick meal, but Ophelia insists. She says he earned every bit of it and asks him to come back tomorrow. A short while later, Ophelia brings the bowl of porridge to the girl's room and gently reminds her that she's supposed to stay out of sight. Still, since Kurt doesn't come off as dangerous, Ophelia figures is probably fine this time. Lizzie hasn't touched the food yet, so Ophelia offers to taste test it for poison, just to be safe. But Lizzie shakes her head because there's no need. Even though she only spent a short time talking to Kurt, she got a gut feeling that he's not the type to do something shady. And honestly, with how far the curse has spread, a little poison wouldn't make much difference now. She spent her whole life second-guessing everyone around her, but just this once, she wants to put her faith in someone. Ophelia stays quiet for a moment, then lets her go ahead and eat. But right after Lizzie takes her first bite, she starts sweating heavily and suddenly collapses to the floor. Panic strikes Ophelia, and she's absolutely certain Kurt did poison her, so she's already gearing up to hunt him down. But then Lizzie sits up like nothing happened and says she feels amazing and the curse is completely gone. Ophelia stands there frozen because what the hell just happened? That curse was incredibly advanced, the kind of thing that takes years of research and a team of experts to even weaken, let alone undo. But it was just gone, and all it took was a damn bowl of porridge. Meanwhile, miles away, the shady organization that cursed Lizzie is holding an emergency meeting. They just got word that their curse has been lifted, and now their whole plan to quietly assassinate her has gone up in flames. Since their subtle approach failed, they're now preparing to take more extreme action. Later that night, Ophelia and Lizzie walk into Mimiko's shop with something urgent on their minds. Lizzie pulls back her hood, and the moment Mimiko and Eurytia see her face, their jaws drop. They recognize her immediately. She's the 3rd princess of the kingdom. Ophelia explains that someone placed a deadly curse on Lizzie in an attempt to take her out. They still don't know who's behind it, but considering Lizzie is the only child born from the union between the king and Princess Françoise of Gurumaku, her existence is basically the peace treaty between both kingdoms. So if someone wanted to reignite that conflict, she'd be a prime target. Mimiko is relieved Lizzie survived, but also baffled. How the hell does she break a curse like that? Lizzie gives credit where it's due. She didn't lift it herself, and it was a man named Kurt. The moment Eurytia and Mimiko hear that name, their expressions change instantly, and their eyes go wide. They then sit down, and Eurytia still can't wrap her head around the fact that a damn bowl of porridge broke the curse Lizzie had been suffering under for years. At this point, she's well aware Kurt can pull off some wild stuff, but seriously, she leaves him alone for half a day, and he ends up curing the princess. They're definitely going to reward him for it eventually, but Mimiko thinks the more urgent priority is figuring out who was behind the curse in the first place. Normally, Lizzie's room is protected by anti-curse enchantments, which means someone must have tampered with them before the curse hit, and only 3 people had access to that room during the window of time it could have happened. First, there's Sinova Riskats, the first general of the Royal Expeditionary Forces, then Tristan Maynolf, the Bishop of the Poland Church, and finally Isadora, the kingdom's 3rd queen. Obviously, they can't just start throwing accusations around without something solid to back it up. Ophelia proposes setting a trap to draw the culprit out, and she already has a pretty slick plan in mind. Since Lizzie just turned 15, royal tradition says she needs to head out for a year of training. The people who tried to kill her are bound to take another shot, so Ophelia wants to announce that Liz is going to be apprentice under an atelier master. The idea is to create a fake master and fake location, then sit back and wait. Whoever's behind the curse will likely try to dig up intel to plan their next move, and when they do, they'll walk right into the trap. But for the plan to work, they'll need someone with real achievements to sell the lie, and Eurytia knows just the guide. So she hands Ophelia one of the magic crystals that Kurt made, and the second Ophelia lays eyes on it, she's floored. The craftsmanship and energy quality are on a whole other level. It's hands down the most flawless crystal she's ever seen. As for Kurt, the next day he heads back to Ophelia's house, ready to get back to work. But when he gets there, there's a note on the door saying she's out. He then runs into Michelle and asks what's going on, and she explains that after he left the day before, Ophelia suddenly went out with Lysia and hasn't returned since. That means there's nothing lined up for Kurt today, so he ends up walking off a little bummed and decides to swing by the guild and grab something to eat. While Kurt is eating, he overhears a party chatting at the table next to him. They're clearly in a panic because their porter came down sick, and without one, they won't be able to handle their next quest. They don't have time to advertise for a replacement either, so it looks like they're going to have to pull the plug on the mission altogether. Kurt thinks it over and figures he can handle the porter's duties just fine. So he gets up, heads over to their table, and politely introduces himself. He admits he's pretty useless in a fight, but he's confident that he can still pull his weight as their porter. Cena laughs at the idea, saying a twig like him wouldn't survive the first haul. Canons immediately smacks her upside the head and apologizes for his sister's rude attitude. But he still isn't convinced because the porters deal with some serious heavy lifting and their current mission involves hauling golems that weigh over 200 kilos each. But Kurt casually responds that 200 kilos is no problem. Then just to prove it, he casually picks up both Cans and Danzo at the same time. And he makes it look like he's carrying pillows, even with Cans decked out in 150 kilos of armor. So that's more than enough to convince them, and they officially bring him on board as their substitute porter. As they head toward the mission site, the crew gives Kurt a proper introduction. Cans is the squad's frontline brawler, and he's got a sword but prefers his fists. Danzo is a samurai, and Cena handles the long-range game as a ranger. There's supposed to be one more member, but he's homesick, which is why they needed Kurt to fill in. They tell them they're happy to have him aboard, and Kurt thanks them for giving a talentless guy like him a chance. That catches them off guard, since nobody who can casually squat 400 kilos should be calling themselves weak, but they figure he's just being modest or maybe has a weird sense of humor. The group keeps moving forward, but then Kurt suddenly lets out a scream. The whole party whips around to help, thinking something serious has happened, only to find Kurt frantically wrestling with a slime. He's absolutely freaking out, and Cena has to step in to tell him to relax because all he needs to do is strike the slime's core to kill it. Kurt tries to follow Cena's instructions, but the second he goes to stab the slime's core, his knife just bounces off. It refuses to pierce, and somehow he ends up poking himself instead. It's clear he's completely hopeless in combat, so Cena steps in and slices the slime cleanly in half. She's shocked by just how awful his attack form really is. Sure, he mentioned earlier that he sucked at fighting, but she didn't think he was this bad. Kurt apologizes, clearly embarrassed, but the team doesn't even blink. They tell him not to stress over it because his job is just to lighten the team's load during quests, and he doesn't need to fight because that's what they're here for. Kurt is stunned because he just failed miserably, but no one's mad at him, and they're actually being nice. This is a whole different vibe from how he was treated in Dragon Fang, so honestly, he's just grateful he ended up with a team this good. A little while later, they finally reach the cave, but it's pitch black inside. Cena spreads some glow moss to light the place up, and with better visibility, Kurt notices something odd. There's a piece of shit on a nearby rock. He nervously asks if that's something he should be worried about. Cena takes one glance and tells him it's goblin droppings. Judging by how fresh it is, there's a good chance a goblin nest is nearby. Kurt immediately starts to panic because if he couldn't even deal with a slime, how the hell is he supposed to do against goblins? But Cans reassures him. As long as it's just a few, they've got it handled. That said, if they run into an entire goblin horde, it's game over, so they just need to be careful and avoid making too much noise. They move deeper into the cave and eventually they find a set of ancient-looking ruins. As they're walking, Kurt notices something weird about one of the walls. Something doesn't feel right. But before he can figure it out, Cena spots a goblin nearby and immediately tries to take it down. Unfortunately, she's a second too late. The goblin managed to shout before she could land the hit. And now they can all hear it, the unmistakable sound of dozens of goblin feet storming toward them from both ends of the tunnel. This wasn't supposed to happen because the report said nothing about a horde. Now they are outnumbered and trapped, and even with no exit in sight, so Cena turns to Danzo, hoping he has some kind of plan. But looking at the numbers, the only option left is to fight like hell and hope for a miracle. Kurt suddenly speaks up and tells the group he found a hidden passage tucked behind the wall. That's definitely a relief, but even with a secret tunnel, there's no way they'll outrun the goblins, not all of them together, so they need a distraction. Danzo and Cannons exchange a silent nod with Sina, and she immediately gets what they mean. Without saying much, she grabs Kurt and pulls him into the hidden passage, slamming the door shut behind them. Kurt starts freaking out, asking why she locked the door while Danzo and Cans are still outside, but Sina explains that this is what they wanted. Cans then calls out that if all four of them try to run, the goblins will just chase them down. So he and Danzo are going to act as bait, draw the goblins away, and buy Kurt and Sina time to escape. It's a suicide mission and they all know it. Kurt is desperate to go back, but Sina stops him. She doesn't like abandoning her teammates either, but there's no other option. Kurt can't fight at all, and her own combat skills are only decent, so they just slow Danzo and Cans down if they stayed, so this is how it has to be. Still, she's clinging to hope, saying she's sure the others will survive somehow. But deep down, Danzo and Cans know they won't make it. Even so, they have no regrets. If they're going to die, they'd rather go out protecting their allies because that, to them, is the highest form of honor. Sina then tells Kurt they need to get moving, so she tosses some glow moss around the area to light the place up and look for an exit. But then her face drops. This isn't just a secret passage, it's a boss room. And they're not alone in here because an iron dragon is standing before them. Meanwhile, back in town, Lysia tells Eurytia that she wants to see Kurt again, so Eurytia agrees to take her to his inn. When they get there, Eurytia picks the lock like it's nothing, and the two of them slip into Kurt's room. But to their surprise, it's empty. Suddenly, a voice speaks out, telling them that if they're looking for Kurt, he's on a mission near the northeastern caves. Eurytia jumps at the sound and runs outside to confront whoever it is, but by the time she gets there, Bandana is already gone. Confused, she processes what she just heard. But if Kurt really is in those caves, he might be in serious danger. Eurytia remembers that not long ago there was a goblin-slaying training program held in that region. If any of those goblins survived, there's a good chance they regrouped and built a nest there. Eurytia immediately tells Lysia to stay behind because she's going after Kurt herself, but Lysia refuses and says if Kurt's in danger, she wants to help. Eurytia tries to reason with her, pointing out that dragging a princess into a monster-infested cave isn't exactly smart, but Lysia insists. She's been practicing magic since she was little, and she's confident she can handle herself. Besides, Eurytia is her bodyguard, so leaving Lysia alone would be even more reckless. Eurytia knows there's no winning this argument, so she reluctantly agrees. The two of them then head toward the cave entrance, and the moment they step inside, they notice faint trails of glow moss still glowing on the walls, so someone was here not long ago. Lysia casts a sensory enhancement spell, and Eurytia assumes she's going to heighten her hearing to locate Kurt. But instead, Lysia drops to all fours and starts sniffing the ground like a bloodhound. She'd only spent maybe 10 minutes with Kurt, but that was apparently more than enough for her to memorize his scent. After sniffing around for a bit, she picks up his trail, and right after, she catches the sound of battle echoing from down one of the tunnels. She quickly notifies Eurytia and buffs her stats so she can rush in to help. Elsewhere in the cave, Danzo and Cans are still fighting tooth and nail to hold off the goblin swarm. Their stamina is running out and their movements are getting slower. But before the goblins can land a killing blow, a blur flashes through the horde. In the blink of an eye, Eurytia cuts them all down in a single strike. Over in the sealed chamber, Sina is already on her knees, fully convinced that this is the end for them. There's just no way to take down a full-blown iron dragon golem, not with what they've got. So she turns to Kurt and apologizes for getting him into this whole mess. But Kurt tells her not to stress because he's dealt with these kinds of things plenty of times. Sina blinks in disbelief as Kurt calmly walks toward the hulking monster. Right as the beast swings at him, Kurt leaps up and lands square on its tail. He gives it a gentle poke with his dagger, and just like that, the entire tail gets sliced clean off. He follows up by doing the same to all of the dragon's limbs, one light tap at a time until the creature collapses in pieces. Sina just stares in shock. How the hell did the guy who couldn't even kill a slime take down a dragon golem like it was nothing? Honestly, she's kind of terrified right now, but Kurt doesn't get what the big deal is, because to him, mining golems is just another day at work. Just then, Eurytia bursts into the secret chamber, eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Instead, she finds Kurt casually standing in front of a pile of dragon golem parts like it's no big deal. Kurt lights up when he sees her and immediately asks if she can help Danzo and Cans because they might still be in danger. But Eurytia quickly reassures him that she already took care of it, and they're a little banged up, but they'll live. Now that everyone's safe, the whole group gathers up inside the room to talk things over. First, Danzo and Cans thank Eurysthea for saving their asses, saying that if she hadn't shown up when she did, they'd be Goblin Chow. But Eurysthea brushes it off and says they don't need to thank her. Instead, she turns to Kurt and says there's something important she wants to ask him. As Kurt loads up a few dragon parts to carry, Eurysthea tells him that she's opening a brand new atelier and wants him on board. Kurt hesitates because he's still part of this party and it doesn't feel right to bail on them. But Cams waves him off immediately, saying it's a great opportunity and he shouldn't let it pass him by. If Eurysthea's offering, then Kurt should absolutely take it. With her blessing, Kurt agrees to join the atelier. Eurysthea also mentions that she needs some muscle to guard the shop once it opens and asks Cans and the others if they're up for the job. The answer is an enthusiastic yes, and Cans even says this calls for a proper celebration once they're back in town. Speaking of town, Eurysthea reminds Kurt to stop by the guild agency and get his skills officially evaluated because she's already arranged for someone to handle the appraisal personally. A few hours later, Kurt arrives at the agency and is introduced to Mimiko, a high-ranking mage of the royal court. She's heard rumors about Kurt's talents and offers to perform an aptitude check for his non-combat skills. When it's done, Mimiko tells him all his stats came out as B rank. But that's a total lie because in reality, every single reading came back as triple S rank. And his mana pool is bigger than anything Mimiko has ever seen. So she's relieved it was her who handled the appraisal because if this information got out, it could lead to a kingdom-wide crisis. Honestly, the only option would be to silence any witnesses immediately, which is a real problem, considering Kershaw just overheard the whole damn thing. The next morning, the group sets off straight to the town where the new atelier workshop was supposed to be established. However, Eurysthea still hadn't mentioned who the new atelier master would be, so Cans was particularly eager to meet this mysterious figure. Eurysthea, of course, can't just drop the truth, so she starts throwing together excuses on the fly. At this point, Cinna's already figured out that Eurysthea didn't bring their party along out of the kindness of her heart, and when Cans asked about the master, Eurysthea got all weird, which only made Cinna more suspicious. As they approached the town, Kurt suddenly realized it was the same place where he had repaired the wall. Given his misunderstanding that the Margrave had dismissed him for poor work, returning here filled him with anxiety. Eventually, Eurysthea led the group directly to the site intended for the atelier workshop, but calling it a workshop felt ridiculous. The area was nothing more than an empty plot of land. Cans bluntly pointed out that they couldn't exactly run a shop from an empty patch of dirt, and Eurysthea quickly reassured him she was aware of that. Instead, she explained the group would wait at an inn until Kurt finished building the atelier workshop himself. Turning to Kurt, she asked if he thought he could finish it by the end of the day. Kurt, however, felt this was far too unreasonable. Even with his skills, a single day just wasn't enough, but he estimated he'd probably need at least 3 days. Understanding his position, Eurysthea immediately told Kurt to take all the time he needed, emphasizing that there was no rush. She also let him know that if he required additional materials, she was ready to provide anything he requested. Relieved to hear this, Kurt promptly produced a list of materials he had already prepared in his mind. Eurysthea took the paper and glanced over the items, things like amethyst and griffin feathers, which immediately caught Cinna's attention. She couldn't understand why such rare materials were necessary just to build a simple workshop. Eurysthea, however, had learned by now not to question Kurt's methods. She simply assured him that she'd do her best to obtain everything he asked for. Unfortunately, collecting these materials would take a couple of days, but Kurt was totally okay with waiting. Cinna, though, still has this weird gut feeling that something fishy is going on, and Eurysthea can tell she's onto her, but still neither of them says anything and just plays it cool for now. Finally, Eurysthea instructed everyone to head over to the inn, allowing Kurt to work undisturbed. However, before leaving him to his task, she gently reminded Kurt to take care of himself, making him promise that he'd return to the inn by nightfall to rest and eat properly. Meanwhile, once everyone arrived at the inn, Eurysthea gathered them together, explaining that she had something important to share. Until now, Cans and Danzo assumed Kurt was just an ordinary person, but Eurysthea knew she couldn't hide the truth indefinitely, especially since Cinna had already witnessed Kurt's extraordinary abilities. Cinna then immediately asked Eurysthea to tell them exactly who Kurt really was, but Eurysthea hesitated, wanting to formally introduce herself first. She took out her royal family crest, revealing to them that she was actually an adventurer in service of the royal family. Then gesturing to the girls seated across from them, Eurysthea introduced Lysia as the third princess of the kingdom. Cans, Danzo, and Cinna were all stunned by this revelation. Cans awkwardly stood up, unsure if he should greet Lysia properly, but the princess reassured him that formalities weren't necessary. Since she was currently keeping her identity hidden, Lysia gently asked them to treat her as they would any ordinary girl. Considering Liz's royal status, Sina quickly asked if that means Kurt is a noble too, but Eurysthea clarified that Kurt wasn't royal or noble, he was just a regular civilian. Well, maybe not exactly normal, but certainly not noble. Eurysthea confessed that even she didn't fully understand Kurt's background. However, she did know that all of his combat skills were officially ranked G, while literally every other skill he possessed was rated at an unbelievable triple S rank. Cans, Danzo, and Sina were speechless, finding it hard to believe such legendary skill levels could even exist, though it made perfect sense after witnessing Kurt in action. Eurysthea continued, emphasizing that Kurt's true abilities were classified information and none of them were permitted to discuss it with anyone. Even Kurt himself wasn't aware of the truth. Eurysthea and Mimiko had lied to him, telling him he was only at B rank. Moreover, Eurysthea revealed that Kurt was actually intended to become the new Atelier Master, although she had no plans of telling him the real reason behind this. Hearing this, Sina suddenly stood up, angrily confronting Eurysthea about her deception. She couldn't understand why Eurysthea would lie to Kurt like that, especially about something so important. Eurysthea tried to justify herself by suggesting that Kurt wouldn't believe the truth even if she told him. Sina wasn't buying that explanation and angrily called Eurysthea out, saying that it was a ridiculous excuse. Eurysthea then attempted another justification, claiming she was merely trying to protect Kurt, because if his true abilities became public knowledge, others would surely exploit him. But Sina countered sharply, stating that from her point of view, Eurysthea was the one doing the exploiting. Unable to respond to Sina's accusations, Eurysthea fell silent. Sina, thoroughly disgusted by the situation, turned to Cans and made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with this entire mess. After a short silence, Danzo asked Lizia to explain a bit more about their situation. Lizia nodded and told them that just a few days ago, Kurt had broken a deadly curse placed on her, and he'd done it simply by giving her a bowl of porridge. Currently, someone was after Lizia's life, which was why they devised this whole scheme about setting up an Atelier Master. Their plan was to draw the assassins out, identify the culprit, and finally put an end to it. Of course, Kurt wasn't aware of any of this yet. Lizia understood that it seemed selfish dragging Kurt into their plan without telling him, but she assured them that she and Eurysthea deeply cared about Kurt and would never intentionally put him in harm's way. She asked them earnestly if they'd be willing to keep this secret and join forces with them to ensure Kurt's safety. Danzo took a moment before responding, clarifying that as adventurers, they weren't obligated to follow the orders of any royalty, but since Kurt was their friend, they'd do anything necessary to protect him. Cans quickly echoed Danzo's sentiment, reassuring Lizia they were fully on board. Lizia was relieved to hear they would help, but Sina still thought this was too much, considering they'd known Kurt for barely 2 days. Eurysthea understood exactly how Sina felt. After all, even though Eurysthea talked about Kurt as if they were old friends, she'd only met him last week herself. To this day, she still found it hard to believe the incredible things she'd seen Kurt do. Sina excused herself, saying she needed to take a walk to clear her head before making any decisions. As she wandered through town, Sina found herself heading toward Kurt's worksite. She felt strongly that Kurt deserved to know the truth about his strength, but as she approached, she froze, completely shocked by what she saw. In just the few short hours since they left, Kurt had already laid down the entire foundation for the workshop by himself. She approached Kurt, asking if he really built all of this alone. Kurt casually confirmed that he had, adding that he thought this was pretty normal since Eurysthea had told him he was only B rank. Sina stared at him in disbelief because there was absolutely no way any B-ranked worker could have pulled off something like this so quickly. It dawned on her that Kurt's perception of ranks was completely warped, especially since he'd grown up in a village where building a dozen houses in a single day was considered normal. By his own standards, Kurt actually felt he was going a bit too slow. Still, Sina couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right for Eurysthea to keep Kurt in the dark and have him do all this work. She asked him if he felt resentful at all, considering the heavy load that had suddenly been placed on his shoulders. Kurt just smiled softly and shook his head. He explained to her that he had no reason to be upset because he actually enjoyed being useful. Back when he was part of the hero party, they constantly belittled him, calling him useless and eventually kicking him out entirely. But here, everyone recognized his worth, and that alone made Kurt happier than he could express. Meanwhile, Danzo is hanging around the town square for a meeting with a trusted informant, one who just so happens to look a lot like Bandana. Remember how Danzo's party hired Kurt after their original porter got sick? Well, it turns out that wasn't just bad luck. The so-called Porter Bibinak was actually a spy planted in their group with the goal of tearing them apart from the inside. Apparently, some jealous adventurers who couldn't stand how successful Danzo's team was had paid him off to sabotage them. The informant already tracked Bibinak down and left clear directions for where to find him, so now Danzo can do whatever he wants with that info. He pays her for the solid intel, and later that day, he heads out to a local tavern. Sitting at one of the tables is a bald scumbag who's sulking into his drink. Not only did the waitress give him a dirty look when he tried to grope her, but his whole plot to wipe out Danzo's crew also flopped hard. Still, he's already cooking up a new scheme. He recently caught wind that Danzo's party is now working with an atelier workshop that has ties to the third princess. If he plays his cards right, targeting them now could score him a fat payday. That's when Danzo speaks up from the shadows and asks if he's enjoying what might be his last drink. Bibinak hears that voice, freezes, then bolts for the door. He takes off down the alley in full panic mode, but he doesn't get far because he trips right over a perfectly placed wire and crashes to the ground hard. Danzo strolls toward him without rushing. At first, he brushed off Bibinak's sketchy excuse when he called in sick for that mining job, but now it's crystal clear that the whole thing was part of a setup. Bibinak tries to fake innocence, acting like he doesn't know what the hell Danzo's talking about, but it's way too late for that Dan crap. Danzo draws his sword and takes a swing at Bibinak's neck, but stops just short. He decides not to spill blood, at least not tonight. Instead, he leans in close and tells Bibinak to stay the hell away from him and his team because if he shows his face again, Danzo swears he won't hesitate next time. Danzo walks off, and not far behind, Bandana watches from around a corner. She's clearly frustrated that Danzo didn't finish Bibinak off because odds are that guy's gonna be a problem later. So she figures she'll just take care of it herself. But before she can make a move, two hooded figures suddenly show up and start hauling Bibinak away. She instantly recognizes them. They're part of the Phantom Squad, a unit that reports directly to Mimiko. Now she's really wondering why a royal court mage would be mixed up in something like this. That's when her messenger Crow shows up with a letter from her superior, telling her to back off since this whole situation falls under Marlefist's authority. That's another disappointment for Bandana, but orders are orders. So with nothing left for her to do here, she gets ready to head back to Kurt's village. But speaking of Marlefist, things aren't going too well for her either because she's been captured and is currently trapped inside a freaking magic circle. Back in town, Danzo and Cans wake up the next day and are completely blown away when they see what Kurt built. The dude even managed to add trees and shrubs, and they have no damn clue how he got them to grow overnight. Everyone's stunned except Lysia, who's off in her own little world, daydreaming about marrying Kurt and living with him here forever. Then Kurt walks out to say good morning and invites them inside. He gives them a full tour of the place, starting with the entrance, then showing off the 2 basement floors and even the custom water purification system he built using magic gems. He also made sure there were rooms for everyone, plus a special one reserved for the atelier master. And speaking of the master, Kurt still has no clue that it's supposed to be him. Yurishia doesn't want to drop that on him yet, so she quickly makes up a story about the atelier master being delayed. Then she switches gears and casually asks Kurt where his room is. But Kurt, with his usual low self-esteem, says he doesn't need one. He figured he'd just crash in a broom closet since all he's really good for is running errands. Of course, everyone immediately shuts that down and insists he use the atelier master's room instead, since it's just sitting empty. But convincing him takes 2 full damn hours. Yurishia then asks Kurt if he could set up a barrier around the house to help block out any curses. But Kurt's never actually made a barrier before, so he's not even sure if that's something he can pull off. In that case, Yurishia figures she'll just have to rely on the backup ward spells that Mimiko left behind. So she spends the whole night placing them around the property one by one. The final seal has to go right outside Lysia's room, so Yurishia heads over and sticks it up. But the second Lysia hears footsteps out in the hallway, she assumes Kurt's trying to sneak into her room, and she practically sprints to the door ready to greet him with open arms. But when she sees it's just Yurishia, she's super let down since she was clearly hoping to rope Kurt into cuddling with her for the night. Yurishia tells her to cut the weird fantasies and warns her not to mess with Kurt's innocent head, especially since he's the kind of guy who'd do anything just to feel useful. So if she told him to plow her field, he'd likely grab his innocent shovel and start digging her. The next day, Kurt's busy in the kitchen cooking breakfast for everyone when Lysia strolls out wearing nothing but an apron. Yurishia loses it and tells her to stop trying to corrupt the poor guy, but Lysia shrugs it off, saying she's got clothes on underneath, barely but still. Once breakfast is ready, the group all sits down to eat, and everyone's blown away by how good the food tastes. But Yurishia notices something weird. Kurt isn't there with them. Lysia says she heard him talking earlier about wanting to clean up some graffiti someone drew on the mansion walls. Yurishia freezes because that graffiti he mentioned was definitely the set of barrier spells she placed last night. Normally, no one could just scrub off a ward with a rag, but this is Kurt we're talking about, so she rushes out in a panic to stop him, but she's already too late. He's wiped out every single spell, and he still thinks it was just some random doodles someone drew on the walls. Hiroshia never told him about the curse assassination attempt targeting Lysia, so now thanks to his extreme overachieving, Lysia is completely exposed to curses again. And with Mimiko gone, there's nobody around to throw up another set of barrier seals, so now Hiroshia has no damn idea what the hell to do next. Meanwhile, Marlefus had been summoned to a meeting with the bishop of the church. The moment she arrives, he bluntly informs her that she is being excommunicated. Stunned, Marlefus demands to know the reason behind this decision, so the bishop explains that numerous complaints and solid evidence have surfaced regarding the violent and destructive behavior of the Flaming Dragon Party. To make matters worse, he recently received word that Golnova has been declared a wanted criminal, and the church wants to sever all ties with her before things escalate further. Marlefus tries desperately to plead her case, insisting that she personally hasn't done anything wrong aside from that one incident where she casually electrocuted a minimum wage waiter with level 5 lightning magic. But in her defense, she argues the food he served was absolutely terrible, so he totally deserved it. Obviously, that kind of excuse would never hold up in court, but the bishop wasn't exactly a saint himself. Sensing an opportunity, he tells Marlefus that he's willing to turn a blind eye to her minor sins and even promote her to the rank of priest, but only if she does one little favor for him. The moment she hears promotion to priest, Marlefus's eyes practically light up like a kid in a candy shop, and she eagerly agrees to whatever he asks, ready to get on her knees, metaphorically or otherwise, if that's what it takes. However, the situation takes an unexpected turn. The bishop casually pours a glass of wine and offers it to her, which she drinks without question. Then, instead of anything remotely close to what she imagined, the bishop calmly tells her that he wants her to assassinate the third princess of the kingdom. Marlefus would normally have refused outright, but by the time she realizes the truth, it's too late. The wine was laced with a deadly curse, ensuring a slow, agonizing death unless she complies. Cornered with no other way out, Marlefus swears loyalty to the bishop's plan, which unfortunately for her, includes sealing her inside a magic circle alongside a demon to guarantee her obedience. Back at Kurt's mansion, things are a lot more peaceful. Everyone is enjoying a hearty breakfast, and surprisingly, Lysia hasn't suffered from any new curses, despite Kurt accidentally wiping out all the old protective spells. Hiroshia still hasn't figured out why no new curses have been placed on Lysia yet, but since Kurt's magic-infused cooking has powerful purification properties, it's likely neutralizing any attempts before they take hold. Either way, it looks like Lysia's safety isn't in jeopardy anymore, especially now that Mimiko has finally arrived in town. And with Ophelia's help, they've begun weaving a sophisticated information network to sniff out anyone plotting against Lysia. Lysia soon notices that there's something a little different about the cake Kurt made today, and Kurt explains that he used rice flour instead of regular wheat flour. Lysia absolutely loves the flavor because it reminds her of the rice porridge Kurt made for her back when they first met, so she excitedly asks if he would be willing to make it for her again if she ever got cursed. Kurt warmly tells her he'd be happy to whip up as much rice porridge as she wants, though he assures her that she doesn't have to worry about being cursed anymore. Hiroshia, hearing this, looks a little surprised and asks Kurt how he can be so confident, especially when he had told her earlier that he couldn't set up any anti-curse barriers. Kurt confirms that while he can't install barriers inside the mansion, it's only because the entire house itself already functions as one massive curse barrier. Any curse-based magic cast at them will automatically be reflected back at the sender, although Kurt did make a few personal adjustments to it. As fate would have it, at that exact moment, one of the assassins targeting Lysia decides to launch a fresh curse. The magician starts the ritual for his most powerful curse yet, but instead of hitting Lysia, the magic immediately backfires. The curse dissipates harmlessly and rebounds onto the caster, which makes his body glow forever like an electric lamp. Kurt had set up the barrier to retaliate this way specifically because he didn't want to outright kill anyone, no matter how much they might deserve it, and this seemed like a far more humane alternative. Hiroshia is once again left speechless by Kurt's incredible skill. She's relieved to see that Kurt is doing so much to protect Lysia, but she knows she needs to go inform Ophelia and Mimiko immediately so they can track down anyone who suddenly looks like they swallowed a spotlight. Since Hiroshia will be tied up for a while, Kurt casually strolls over to Lysia and asks if she'd like to go shopping with him. Lysia is completely stunned because this is practically the same as asking her out on a date, but Kurt simply thought it might be nice to take a walk through the city, especially since Lysia hasn't had a chance to leave the mansion yet. Overwhelmed but touched, Lysia thanks him for the offer. However, considering the current situation, she regretfully tells him she can't go out at all. At the same time, atop the city walls, Margrave Alarade and his Vice General Generic are surveying the horizon with growing concern. It appears that a massive horde of monsters is advancing toward the city. Still, they probably don't need to panic just yet because the walls have been fully repaired and their army stands ready to defend at a moment's notice. At the same moment, Eurytia, Mimiko, and Ophelia finally track down the human light bulb. But unfortunately, it seems his own comrades killed him. They must have realized that driving a glowing corpse around would attract too much attention. Even so, Eurytia is surprised that Kurt's glowing curse remains active even after death. Seeing how impressive that is for a spell he whipped up on short notice, Ophelia suggests they just come clean to Kurt and ask for his help, because it would make finding the assassins a lot easier. But Eurytia hesitates, saying she doesn't want to drag Kurt into this any more than she already has, even though she knows deep down that he's already way too involved. Just then, alarm bells start ringing all across the city. The monsters have begun their assault. Up on the walls, the Margrave orders his soldiers to fire off light spells to illuminate the battlefield, and when the light reveals what's coming, his heart sinks. An endless horde of skeletons is slowly advancing toward the walls, and there's no way his troops can hold the line against that many. Realizing this, he commands a portion of his forces to stay behind and fight to the death if necessary, buying time while the rest focus on evacuating as many civilians as possible. The Margrave is fully prepared to lay down his life for his people. But just as the skeletons reach the outer walls, something incredible happens. They begin vanishing one after another, dissolving into nothingness. The Margrave has no clue what the hell is going on until it hits him. This section of the wall was rebuilt by Kurt. Somehow, some way, Kurt must have put something into the walls themselves that purifies the monsters, so in the end, the entire skeleton army is wiped out without a single casualty. Meanwhile, we jump back to Marlefus, still trapped within the demon's magic circle. The bishop had made a pact with this advanced class demon, fueling its summoning magic with Marlefus's mana. With the first wave failing miserably, the demon begins preparing even more skeletons, planning to keep draining Marlefus's life force until there's nothing left of her. Back inside the city, Kurt has just gotten word of the attack and asks Eurytia if they're going to be alright. Eurytia explains that the entire city is now surrounded on all sides by monsters. While the knights are scrambling to form a counterattack, there's only so much they can do given the situation. Right now, the only reason the city hasn't fallen already is because a huge chunk of the skeletons were purified the moment they set foot near the walls. Kurt explains that he enchanted the walls during the repairs, and honestly, stuff like this was considered basic maintenance back in his village. He's genuinely surprised that people here never thought about enchanting their walls before. That said, Kurt only got the chance to reinforce 2 of the city's 4 walls, meaning if the skeletons shift their attack to the unprotected sections, they'll break through the city walls pretty fast. Lysia then does the logical thing and politely asks Kurt if he could just whip up a weapon that could wipe out all the skeletons at once. Kurt starts seriously considering it, but before he can say anything, Eurytia abruptly cuts in, announcing that she needs to step out for a while. Before leaving, she sternly reminds both Kurt and Lysia that they are absolutely forbidden from stepping outside the mansion under any circumstances. Lysia is more than happy with that arrangement. After all, it means she gets to enjoy some uninterrupted time alone with Kurt. Meanwhile, Eurytia heads to the storage room and grabs a box packed full of the powerful magic crystals Kurt had previously crafted. Armed with her secret weapon, Eurytia, Ophelia, and Mimiko rush over to meet with the Margrave. Alraid immediately recognizes Eurytia since they're old acquaintances, but he's stunned to see her here of all places. Eurytia wastes no time getting to the point. She has a plan to stop the skeleton invasion. Since the monsters seem to be spawning from the nearby ruins, she proposes striking the source directly and destroying it. Of course, for that to happen, Alraid and his soldiers will need to act as a diversion, drawing the skeletons away from the ruins long enough for her team to reach it. Alraid thinks the plan is ridiculously risky and hesitates to approve it, but Eurytia reassures him with full confidence, revealing one of Kurt's magic crystals. She explains that a single one of these stones carries enough destructive power to level an entire building, more than enough to obliterate the ruins and cut off the skeleton army at its roots. Seeing Eurytia's determination, Alraid ultimately agrees, but under one condition. He insists on joining the strike team himself. Eurytia knows Alraid is no slouch when it comes to combat, but still asks if he's truly prepared to put his life on the line. Alraid doesn't back down because as far as he's concerned, it's his sworn duty to protect this city. Besides, with his Vice General Generic handling the command of the main force and Mimiko and Ophelia guarding the civilians, he can afford to go personally. At the same time in the mansion, Kurt finishes sweeping the garden when he starts thinking about what Lysia said earlier regarding making a weapon. With that in mind, he heads toward the forge he built and gets straight to work. He mentioned that back in his village, the blacksmiths could craft incredible weapons with such effortless skill. And while Kurt still struggles with his confidence, he's determined to be useful to his friends. No matter what it takes, he's going to give it everything he's got to forge a proper weapon. At the same time, Eurytia and Alraid are preparing to set out, but they find their path blocked by a horde of monsters. Thinking quickly, Eurytia pulls out one of the magic crystals Kurt made and readies it. She warns the soldiers to close their eyes, and the moment the crystal strikes the ground, a blinding flash of light completely wipes out the monsters. Eurytia had known Kurt's crystals were powerful, but she never expected them to purify such a huge number of enemies all at once. Regardless, it plays to their advantage, clearing the way for the soldiers to hold off the next wave, while Eurytia and Alraid make their way toward the ruins. Back at the mansion, Kurt has just finished forging the blade, but after carefully putting the final touches on it, old insecurities start creeping back into his mind. He was told once that his blacksmithing was only B rank, and deep down, he still doubts whether a sword he made could ever be good enough to fight real monsters. A few minutes later, Lizzie comes by looking for Kurt to ask him about dinner, but then her eyes fall on the sword he's holding and she immediately thinks it looks beautiful. Seeing her reaction, Kurt shyly offers it to her, telling her she can have it if she likes it that much. However, he warns her to be careful because he packed quite a lot of magic power into the blade. Lizzie thanks Kurt for the gift, but even though Kurt is completely oblivious when it comes to his own talents, he definitely knows what a forced smile looks like. It's obvious that something is bothering Lizzie, and truth be told, he's been noticing it for a while now, so he asks her directly if someone is targeting her. Lizzie is surprised that Kurt figured it out, but she admits he's right and apologizes for all the trouble she's caused. Kurt tells her there's no need to apologize, but Lizzie still feels awful because everyone keeps getting dragged into danger because of her. Right now, Eurytia is even out there risking her life just for Lizzie's sake. Although Kurt figured out that someone's after her, he still has no clue that Lizzie is actually a princess, or that keeping her safe is a matter of national security. All he knows is that Eurytia went off to handle something near the ruins, and he vaguely recalls how Golnova once drew graffiti all over those same ruins. So Kurt, connecting the dots in the wrong way, assumes that Eurytia must be battling some crazy graffiti artist who's been stalking Lizzie. His conclusion is way off the mark, but it doesn't change the fact that Eurytia is fighting for Lizzie's sake, and Kurt absolutely hates the feeling of being powerless to help her because his combat skills are trash. He can't stand sitting here doing nothing while the people he cares about are in danger, and Lizzie feels the same. She hates the idea of others putting themselves at risk just to protect her, and she would much rather fight for herself if she had the strength to do it. Since she brings it up, Kurt casually suggests that the two of them should just go out and catch the culprit themselves. Liz is immediately on board with the idea, but she points out one major problem. The city is completely surrounded by monsters right now, so how are they even going to get outside? Kurt, without missing a beat, tells her that's not an issue because he has his own ways of getting around problems like this. Meanwhile, all the way out on the battlefield, Eurytia suddenly shivers, sensing deep in her gut that Kurt is probably about to do something insane again. Wraps up episode 5. Subscribe if you don't want to miss what's next.